Welcome back to another episode of the Reddit Archive, brought to you in part by the Cold Coffin channel members. And before we begin, I have a very important announcement regarding the content that I make at the end of this video, so make sure that you stick around to find out. But enough of that, let's dive in. Thursday, August 7th of 2025. A Redditor by the name Intelligent Goose 9599 posted on the RBI subreddit, concerned after he discovered that somebody might be watching him inside his home. Found hidden camera under desk in my rented apartment. Called police, but I'm not convinced by their conclusion. Long story short, I've been renting this apartment for 4 to 5 months now. I'm here on and off. My girlfriend lives abroad, so I stay here a month, then go back to my country for a few weeks, etc. Recently, I tried to move my desk in my apartment as I wanted to make a DIY den for my rabbit, and I wasn't using the desk much. This is when I realized it was plugged to something behind my wardrobe. They're next to each other. There was this black wire, and I followed it to a small compartment under the desk, where a camera was covertly installed and covered in black tape. The camera was basically positioned so that it perfectly records the groin area of someone sitting down on a chair in front of the desk. I guess it could also record the bed, but it didn't have clear direction towards it, and could only record maybe 25% of the lower part of the bed. The camera was fully covered in black tape, except for the lens, so the light on it wouldn't be visible when turned on. The person who put it there had made sure of this by also covering the whole inside of the desk's compartment with black tape, and cutting a hole through it only for the lens. I can't explain it better, and it would be easier if this sub allowed photos, but the setup was hardly noticeable at all. When I went to the police station, 2 officers drove me to my house and investigated who lived here before me. Apparently it was an escort who people had filed similar complaints against. Similar, from what they said, but they didn't go into much detail. I'm having a hard time figuring out why an escort would use such a setup, and I can't really stop overthinking it. If it was for blackmail, then why place the camera at such a low angle that it couldn't easily capture faces or identifiable features? Why exactly the perfect position to capture someone sitting at the desk? Why a Wi-Fi camera as opposed to a memory card one? The whole building has Wi-Fi, but why would an escort need remote access to the camera even while she's absent? Why positioned in such a place that you would barely capture the feet or legs of someone laying on the bed, and not the whole act? The wire was also taped to the back of my wardrobe with Scotch tape, and it's clear from the setup that this desk has always been in the same place. My apartment is also a very small studio apartment, so not much room to fiddle with the bed's position. We're talking a matter of inches. I have so many questions about this, and I'd really appreciate some insight. A lot of students/kids have lived in this apartment before me, as it's close to a school, and the landlady's husband would often unlock the door even if I wasn't home or didn't open when he's knocking, just to showcase it to potential tenants before I had to ask him to stop and tell him that I'm staying here long term. One time he brought this 14-year-old with her mother to show her the apartment. I'm a guy, so I couldn't really care less if he spied on me as I got nothing to hide. But as I mentioned, kids lived here before me, which is why the officer's conclusion seemed kind of unthoughtful to me, given the possible threat here. Thinking about someone spying on me like that is horrifying, and not to mention, the angle that the camera is positioned in makes it incredibly disturbing. My first thought after reading this was that whoever put the camera there is either a huge creep or really bad at spying on people, because they did not think their camera positioning all the way through when they first put it there. But like many other Redditors in the comments, I did have a strong suspicion for who it could be. No doubt the landlady's husband. Try to find prior people who lived there, and if you contacted a city police department and they didn't help, either ask for someone high up or contact the sheriff instead, vice versa. He likely has a database of all the recordings, and if he's doing this stuff, he likely has a record, which should make it easier for cops to investigate. Also, it's illegal for him to violate tenant rights. Tenants have the rights to be notified no less than 24 hours in advance of any visit inside your apartment. If this need is not met, you can sue him. This just makes the most sense to me. A landlord that just walks into your home without any warning does not respect your privacy, not to mention that this is illegal pretty much everywhere. Now, we could try to give the OP's landlord the benefit of doubt, since we do have the claim of the alleged escort living there before the OP, but as of right now, they are still the prime suspect. The OP would also provide more information and evidence on this post in a later edit. Edit, here's the video I took before I called the cops. I hope the setup is somewhat clear. This is the compartment in the lower part of the desk, tape wrapped in the interior and over the cam, likely to hide the red light coming from when it's plugged in. Watching this video, we get a good look at the camera. I really wanted to figure out what kind of camera this was to see any features that it might have. So, I took a screenshot of the camera, and I noticed that there was some kind of lettering written on it. Unfortunately, as the image currently stood, the lettering was hard to decipher. So I adjusted the image settings, and then, after getting a better guide, I filled the letters in with my mouse in MS Paint. Now, I had a better image to use on an image search, but unfortunately, I still couldn't find the exact one. So instead, despite all of my effort, I looked up white security camera and almost immediately found what I was looking for. The camera is a TP-Link Tapo C200, a camera that features audio and video, night vision, full range of motion, and on top of it using SD storage, also features Wi-Fi connectivity, meaning that it can easily be accessed via an app. So, whoever put the camera under the OP's desk could, in theory, have the ability to check on the OP whenever they liked by simply opening up their phone. Commenters would quickly begin offering up advice. That's a security camera rather than a device intended for clandestine or covert recording. Obviously, it was being used for covert recording, but the limited field of view is quite obvious from your video, as is the fact that this is not a professional grade setup by any means. That is without any doubt. I've done bug sweeping for almost 30 years, an amateur gig. It's actually more likely that it was being used for the audio feed, considering the positioning of the lens, which is wide angle, but would be so obscured that the field of vision would be severely limited. If you're tech savvy, you could always plug it in and use a Wi-Fi snooper to figure out what the device name is. That camera, indoors, can only be picked up within about a 25-meter radius. If even, that's assuming it wasn't connected to Wi-Fi, so it's fair to assume that it was connected to the building's Wi-Fi. Unfortunately, there's no way to trace where it's going unless you know a $300 an hour hacker, and the perpetrator happens to be connected to their camera from their own network, which could be traced to a specific apartment using directional range finding equipment to isolate the strongest Wi-Fi signal correlated with the connected network. Even that would be a shot in the dark, like a 2% chance of figuring it out, probably closer to 0. What I'd do is leave the camera running and print out a piece of paper with the words, "I already called the police, you f***ing creep. Go f*** yourself," or a similar message of your choice. Since these cameras are dirt cheap, that one could be as low as $40 USD, if even that. I'd be very concerned about there being a possibility of additional units in your apartment. However, the amateur nature of the person who installed it makes me think that they lack the expertise and knowledge of how to install a covert camera efficiently, so you're probably safe. My recommendation? Download an app that snoops for Bluetooth and Wi-Fi signals. Trace the manufacturer name and model of the camera. If it said 2.4 GHz non-Wi-Fi model, that would mean someone in an adjacent apartment would have to be the one watching because those signals are essentially line of sight. If it's connected to a Bluetooth network, they'd have to be even closer. If it was in fact connected to Wi-Fi, the perpetrator could be watching from anywhere in the world. If you'd like, I could figure out the technical capability of the camera considering that this is the RBI and that's what people do. I'm a self-declared measurement and signals intelligence sort of professional, so if you give me a make and model number, I can give you a complete technical rundown. I've done many bug sweeps, It's creepy just how many people use baby monitors for audio feeds, because the signals are so weak that they have to be within about 15 to 20 meters max to listen to it on an RF scanner or base station for the monitor. Check crevices in your room and bathroom especially. Considering the odd positioning, it might be simple as someone installing a perf cam to see upskirt videos. But the light would be so limited that it's difficult to imagine someone getting any quality video, and there are no infrared LEDs on the camera that would covertly increase the amount of light hitting the lens. So whoever is doing it, did it fast and without any proper setup. I hope this helps. They weren't able to see much of anything significant, but the audio feed would probably be decent enough to pick up conversations, albeit not very well, and with a lot of noise. Thankfully, because we figured out the exact camera model ourselves, we're able to expand on the commenter's advice. It would be possible to get a Wi-Fi snooper or sniffer, though unless you're somewhat good at IT, it may be hard figuring out how to use it. We know that the camera does have Wi-Fi capabilities, so that widens the range of where the potential watcher could be. I do like the idea of leaving a note in front of the lens and then attempting to see if the landlord or possibly another one of the neighbors acts suspicious or even flat out confesses that it was them. But this commenter brings up a really good point, and it's that the camera may be primarily used for the audio. Video could have been the initial idea, but because the positioning is so bad, the main focus could have become the audio. Well, the OP would come back on August 12th with an update on the situation that gave a little bit more information on who the possible culprit was. Update. I forgot to mention this in my last post, but when the cops called the couple about the camera, which the landlady denied even knowing about and said it was definitely not them, they were on vacation at the beach. Well, they are apparently back, and today when my girlfriend and I were in front of my building, we saw her husband working in the garage. He went up to us himself and started explaining the situation to my girlfriend in her language. I couldn't understand much, but she translated it to me later. Turns out that now his explanation is that the camera was owned by some ex-tenants and that it wasn't plugged in. He said the reason it was still in my room is because he refused to give it back to them because they owed him rent money. He also asked where the camera is now, and she told him that the cops confiscated it. He then said we shouldn't have called the police. So he kept a $40 camera to break even with the ex-tenants and didn't even bother uninstalling the setup before? Seems suspicious to me, especially since the wife denied even being aware of it when she spoke to the cops. Also, he mentioned nothing about the escort that lived there, which the police told us about. This explanation makes even less sense. And the OP is correct. This explanation is not very convincing. The OP points this out, but I want to emphasize on it anyways. So let's assume that there was an escort who recorded their client secretly. If this tenant really did owe the landlord money and had to leave, then why would the landlord continue to keep the belongings rather than sell them off? You could say that he really didn't know that the camera was there, but he has already said that he did know it was there when he talked to the OP. As a landlord, even if it wasn't your setup in the first place, I would personally think that it's weird to leave a hidden camera inside of a room that I'm going to be renting out. If you knew about it before, then why risk potential legal problems down the line? And then we have the landlady, who told the police that she didn't know about the camera. Unless the husband didn't tell his wife, then one of them is lying. And finally, the OP stated that they have lived there for around 4 to 5 months. I know he stated that he went back and forth from his home to his girlfriend's, but still, it's weird that he just now found the camera. But what I find the most suspicious is when the husband asked the OP about the camera. In my opinion, it sounded as though he wanted it back, and then told the OP that they should not have contacted the police. If they really didn't have anything to do with this, then they wouldn't care that the camera was gone and wouldn't be worried about the police at all. One commenter would say this about the camera. LOL, quite the liar. Keep the camera for yourself and move when you can. Tell them you threw away the camera. You won't get the truth out of these two. The OP replied back. Unfortunately, the camera was taken by the 2 cops who visited my apartment that day, and they said they'd send it to forensics. They sounded kind of discouraged though, because I didn't think much of it, and fiddled with it too much / put it in my bag before I went to the station to report it. So they likely won't be able to pick up any prints from it, besides my own probably. It's also not an SD one, so likely nothing they can find at this point. And as of the time of this recording, this is where the story ends. Personally, I doubt the police will be able to get much from the camera, but hopefully they do log and save this as evidence in case the OP has more problems with their landlords. If it was the landlords, then hopefully this situation scares them straight, and they don't attempt to put any more cameras in any of the homes that they rent out. Of course, it could have been somebody else, or have been left over by the previous tenant. But as of right now, my prime suspects are still the landlords. Our next post was submitted to the RBI on August 2nd, 2025, by a user with the name The Next Mrs. Dapper, who was experiencing an unusual situation with their neighbor. Neighbor says they saw a tent in my living room. I honestly don't know what to make of this. The simplest answer is that my neighbor is lying. But why? Here's what happened. This morning, my neighbor knocked on my door and told me that while I was out of town earlier this month, they noticed my front door was open and that a very nice blue and brown 2-person tent had been pitched in the middle of my living room. They said they thought it was a little odd, and that's why they mentioned it. I was on vacation over the 4th of July, and my nephew and another neighbor both fed my cat while I was gone. Neither are the types to pitch a tent in my living room, though to be honest, I'm not sure who would do such a thing. Nevertheless, I asked them about the tent, and neither knew anything about it. I also don't have anything that's blue and brown and could be mistaken for a tent. My living room is mostly black and white. I also don't own a tent. I'm not a camper, and nobody has a set of keys to my house. I have an Arlo camera by my front door, and I set one up in my living room while I was gone so that I could periodically check in on the cat. I'm a little neurotic about her because she's very old. I checked all of the footage going back to June 4th because my neighbor couldn't say for certain when exactly they saw this tent. Needless to say, there's nothing captured by either camera. Unfortunately, the cameras do sometimes fail to capture everything. I'd say they have a 10 to 20% fail rate when it comes to turning on when there's movement. So there's a slight possibility someone could have entered my house, pitched the tent, taken it down, and left, and the cameras wouldn't have caught any of it. But I feel like it's a pretty slim chance that neither would have been triggered. To add to all of this, my cat has been acting super strange ever since I came back. She's very nervous, refuses to go anywhere near the back part of the house, and is not using her litter box. So something did weird her out. So Reddit, any ideas? If my neighbor is lying, which is the most plausible? Why? They've never lied before and always seemed like a reliable neighbor. They also said their boyfriend saw it too and mentioned how weird it was. Is there any scenario where it makes sense for someone to break in and pitch a tent, but also leave the door open so anyone can see? Is it a glitch in the Matrix? Is she somehow suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning? Am I? Thankfully, the Arlo camera outside did capture part of our conversation, so I didn't completely imagine it. It's just so bizarre. I'm just at a complete loss. The whole thing has me left feeling unsettled. The first reasonable assumption is of course that somebody got into the OP's home while they were on vacation. A possible rationalization for why they would put up a tent in the OP's home would be to contain the evidence of their presence inside of the tent as much as possible, so that the chances of being caught were kept at a minimum. Though, seeing as how they apparently were caught, this would have been an absolute failure. But was this one of the people who was cat-sitting for the OP, or potentially somebody else? I believe that if there was a tent, then whoever set it up must have been somewhat close to the OP, seeing as how they knew the OP would be on vacation during that time. Maybe a close friend or family member. I lean more towards the family idea. Maybe the nephew told one of their siblings or cousins that they were cat-sitting for the OP, and that they were out of town, which is something close to what other Redditors would suspect. As much as this does sound like the start of a horror movie, It probably was one of the people who were in the house to take care of the cat, especially if either of them is a teenager. I'm not sure what else you can do to verify. Maybe check the footage to see if they brought any bags in with them, if you haven't already. If they know the location of the cameras, they could be avoided too. What's strange is the cat's sudden change in behavior. Maybe the people cat sitting didn't do a good enough job, and the cat got very stressed out. Or potentially like in horror movies, where the pets of the home refuse to go into a certain area because there's something in there. It's possible that the OP's cat was, and maybe still is, aware of an unwanted visitor. Do you have an attic, basement, or other unused areas in or around your home? I'd be doing a thorough inspection and make sure that everything is in order. Frogging is happening. I think it's spelled frogging, but yeah. What is frogging? People living secretly in someone's home, like in the attic or crawl space. Like the movie Parasite, where an entire family lives inside of their rich boss's home. Some of the commenters believed this might be the case, though if you ask me, this is a bit extreme. And other commenters would focus in more on the neighbor who told the OP about the tent. If the neighbors are lying, the only motivation they have for doing so is to discourage your future vacations. Would they have any motivation for doing that? For instance, do you mow their lawn or help them in some way? Maybe they don't like that you went on vacation. If the neighbors thought that they saw a tent and didn't, this could be drug related. Do the neighbors use drugs? This one seems unlikely. The neighbors came to you confidently, so it seems that they are sure of what they saw and were in clear mind when they saw it. Are the neighbors from down the street or are they from directly across? It's possible that they saw the tent in another house and got confused. How old is the nephew, and can you tell us any details about him? My gut feeling is that the neighbors are telling the truth and your camera missed it, so that leaves the nephew as the likely culprit. Before we go on, since there are multiple neighbors, I will be referring to the two main neighbors as friend neighbor, the neighbor that the OP asked to cat sit for them, and tent neighbor, the neighbor who told the OP about the tent. Currently, the two main theories are that tent neighbor is lying, or that the nephew is lying, but the OP would come back with more information in an edit to this post. Edit. Thanks to everyone who's commented so far. To answer some questions that seem to have come up. 1. I took the cat to a vet, and she got a clean bill of health. I'm trying some behavioral solutions, multiple litter pans, special cat food for urine health, calming cat treats, calming spray, fell away plug-in, etc. It's been hard, but I'm committed to helping her get through this. 2. The neighbor and her boyfriend are both older, I think in their late 60s, and we live on the same property, so she has to walk by my front door to get to the street. I'd say from the walkway to my front door is less than 5 feet, so she has a pretty good view of my living room. I agree with those who said her timing is strange. Why mention it weeks later? But I had recently talked to her about my cat's behavior, so I think she mentioned it as a possible reason for the cat's behavior. She did say, maybe in the future you should let me know when you'll be out of town so I can keep an eye out. At the time it sounded like a normal thing to say, but if she's lying, then maybe it's because she wants to know when I'm gone. 3. My nephew is in his mid-20s and very responsible. He owns his own home and works long days. Neither he nor his brother are campers and, as far as I know, don't own any tents. The camera outside captured him entering and exiting all 3 days, and he was in the house for less than 5 minutes. Same with the other neighbor who fed the cat. She came over 3 times, all for less than 5 minutes. Neither was aware of where the camera was inside, but they knew I had one so I could check the cat. The camera also caught the cat chilling out in the house, and all 3 days she was acting normally. 4. Today I learned about frogging. There is a crawl space under the house, but you can't access it from inside. There's probably a 2-foot high crawl space in the ceiling that you can access from the closet in my bedroom. But I have a bunch of boxes and suitcases shoved up against the opening, and I don't see how someone could put them back if they'd crawled back in. I will say that the more I ruminate on it, the creepier it gets. The tent neighbor's mention of wanting to know when the OP was out of town was pretty strange to me as well. Maybe they were offended that the OP didn't ask them for help, or maybe they're really nosy, which could be why they lied to the OP. The OP doesn't seem to give much information on their friend neighbor, and from what I've seen, doesn't suspect them at all. As far as the nephew, I don't believe he's fully cleared of suspicion at this point. There is still the chance that he told another family member, but most of the suspicion right now is focused on the tent neighbor and why she would lie about this. Thankfully, the OP did come back to this post after some time with an update. So I spoke to all my neighbors again today. The neighbor that saw the tent is still adamant that's what she saw. She said she and her boyfriend saw it around lunchtime and he confirmed. They said the tent was up when they went to lunch and down by the time they came back. When I told her my cameras didn't catch anything, she was unbothered. When suggested that maybe she saw something else, she said, "It was not my imagination. I saw a tent from right here." And then she stood on the walkway and pointed into my house. She seems to think someone might have a copy of my key and is accessing my house whenever I'm out of town. She thinks someone sabotaged both the cameras and mentioned black suits that aren't picked up by security cameras. As a reason, the tent sector wasn't caught. She also mentioned that my other neighbor, the one who checked on my cat, had a large white tent in her yard a few months back. I saw that tent and can verify it existed, but this neighbor said that it is not the tent she saw in my house. I rechecked all of the camera footage one more time. There are no unaccounted for gaps. In fact, there are several snippets of my cat chilling in the living room looking completely unconcerned before and after the cat sitters came into the house. It's actually making me rethink the timeline of when she got spooked. I rechecked the attic access and it hasn't been touched. I also work from home, so it would be hard for someone squatting in the attic to go unnoticed. I took the advice here to check the internet data and electricity usage. Both were way down on the days I was gone. My gas bill was smaller as well, but if the tent was only up for an hour, that makes sense. So then, I spoke with the cat-sitting neighbor. She confirmed the existence of her white tent and explained that she was airing it out on her front yard after a camping trip, which aligns with all of the tent care information in the comments. She also said that she has had similar conversations with this neighbor, where what she is saying is bizarre and unsettling, but she says it with such conviction that you find it hard not to believe. She also understood my unease, saying the whole story reminded her of the Manson family and their creepy crawling. Once she mentioned that possibility, it made me understand why I was feeling so anxious. I have read about the creepy crawling, and the Manson family was a boogie monster for me growing up. For those worried about my cat's well-being, thank you. She seems to be slowly coming back to herself. Right now, I'm putting her in the kitchen at night, and she has a cozy little bed where she sleeps. So far, she hasn't peed anywhere inside since I've started doing this. But I do wake up before 6 every morning to let her out, and she promptly uses the litter pan I have set up for her on the porch. I also started using the urinary health cat food from Royal Canin that someone suggested on another thread, and that seems to be working. Fingers crossed. To end on a lighter note, cat-sitting neighbor also had a whimsical explanation, not to be taken seriously and just for fun, that I also thought I'd share. Apparently, there's a Japanese folklore tradition of trickster raccoons who shapeshift and wreak havoc. She pointed out that it is raccoon season where we live, and in fact, I just saw a mother and her babies by my porch a couple nights ago, and maybe they snuck in and pitched up the tent just to mess with me. I mean, it's as probable as anything else at this point. Next steps, asking the landlords to change the locks. The OP provided an article about the Manson family. Charles Manson's cult members called themselves the Manson family, and one of the things that they liked to do was known as the creepy crawling, in which they snuck into people's homes at night and moved things around while also stealing valuables. Though I don't think this is what's happening. Personally, I believe that the neighbor is lying. Why didn't the neighbor take a photo and immediately contact you? I don't know. My only thought is that when I told her about my cat's recent behavior, it triggered the memory. She specifically came over this morning to tell me. She mentioned that she keeps a journal to record strange happenings, but initially thought I'd pitched the tent so she didn't think anything of it. Do you ever see or talk to the boyfriend? I think you need to ask him and see what he says. He will either know exactly what you're talking about and back up her story, maybe offering more details, or have no idea what you're talking about. I think he's the key to this. I truly hope your cat recovers quickly. Sometimes when we leave them alone, they can get spooked and hold grudges. It's possible one of the people who came to feed them just dropped something loud by the back of the house, and they were alone and upset. I might ask him, but he's kind of strange himself, so it's not an interaction I seek out. But for the sake of my sanity, I might have to. The cat is definitely spooked, and I feel so sad for her. It's odd that she's scared of the bathroom, which is where her litter pan is located, which is pretty far from the living room. It's still hard to determine what's going on here, but as the story progressed, more and more commenters began to question the tent neighbor's claims, and the OP would come back to this post in a final update on August 8th to answer more of the commenters' questions. Second update. This update will probably be a little more than anticlimactic, and for that I apologize. To the people who felt like this was much ado about nothing, I agree. But like I said before, it's her continued insistence and certainty about this bizarre idea that niggles at me. So here we go. 1. The boyfriend does indeed exist. I've met him and spoken with him several times. He seems older than her, and is quieter overall. He has stated that he's a cat person and has engaged with my cat in the past, but I have not had the chance to talk to him separately to get his side of the story. 2. The white tent was in the front yard of my other neighbor's house and faces the opposite street, so a reflection is impossible. That being said, the older neighbor does keep bringing it up and is convinced people were sleeping in it. I've spoken with the front yard neighbor, and she was airing out the tent after a camping trip, so no one ever slept in it when it was in her yard. But I think a lot of folks in the comments are correct when they say that the white tent unsettled the older neighbor, because she brought it up several times. 3. I did loop in the landlords, but they seemed to also believe the older neighbor. She's rented from them for at least 15 years, if not longer, and they told me that in the past she's been very reliable and truthful. They seemed spooked by the whole story and offered to change the locks. I figured it can't hurt, so I agreed. 4. The landlords and I questioned the older neighbor pretty rigorously, and she stuck by her story. Even as we all expressed incredulity, she reiterated that she saw a 2-person tent, blue and white, fully erected in my front living room. She said it was not a pop-up tent or pup tent. She said she saw it on a Wednesday, because that's the day her boyfriend takes her to lunch each week. She said it was up when he picked her up, and down when he dropped her off. She got a little defensive as we probed, so people who warned that this could happen if we challenged her were spot on. She kept reiterating that it was a tent and that she could see it quite clearly. She seemed to want to pin it on my nephew. The landlords seemed to be leaning that way too, which is really frustrating. He's a 25-year-old man with his own home. He has no need to air out a tent in my tiny living room, and he doesn't even camp. 5. The cameras. I double-checked every Wednesday for the last 2 months. There's a limit for the stored videos. No tent, no people entering my house, no footage of her and her boyfriend staring into my house. That being said, there's one Wednesday with no footage because the battery had died, and I forgot to charge it. But I was home. There's only one Wednesday that I went out of town, but I left after 4 p.m. and returned in less than 24 hours. I still feel like this is pretty solid evidence of no tent, but I have to allow for the fact that the cameras were not fully operational. 6. The cat is slowly getting better, though we had a setback today when she peed in the kitchen after the gardener scared her. She is consistently using the litter pan I set up for her outside with no problem. She just refuses to use any litter pan anywhere inside. I have one in the kitchen, one by the front door, one in the pantry, and one in the bathroom. She will only use the one outside. I do think the calming foods is helping since we're down to just one incident, and it was on the puppy pads. I am keeping her in the kitchen at night and letting her out before 6 a.m. every day. Hopefully I can eventually get her to use her litter pan inside. And 7. Raccoon season. I think my front neighbor used this phrase because it's baby season right now. We have a mom and her 2 kids hanging out in our property. If you've never seen a baby raccoon, you're missing out. They're adorable. So like I said at the beginning, not much of a resolution. At this point, I just want to put the whole thing to rest. I'm changing the locks, so if there are mystery indoor campers or mischievous raccoons with a copy of my key, they'll have to find another locale for their shenanigans. I'll stop questioning the neighbor, because she's adamant, and now it feels a little weird to keep harping on it. I'll endeavor to be patient and kind to my cat so that she can get back to her old self. And that's the end of my saga. I'm surprised by how much attention this all got. Reddit says almost 1.5 million people looked at the post and the update. That's nuts. Thanks to everyone for all your comments, suggestions, insights, and comic relief. Even the snarky comments made me laugh. This was the final update that we got from the OP, and while many Redditors were disappointed, others were confident that the tent neighbor was lying, though maybe not on purpose. The general consensus was that the tent neighbor did in fact believe they had seen a tent, but the tent was never there. They could have potentially been experiencing some form of mental health episode, either dementia, schizophrenia, or something of the sort. In particular, the mention of the black suits that avoid camera detection rings some bells, and the way in which the tent neighbor doubles down even more when pressed on the matter is similar to the way people experiencing delusions get when you try to explain to them what's going on. While I do not know if that is the exact cause for why the tent neighbor lied to the OP about the tent, I do believe that this is one of the more plausible explanations to this whole saga. Though there are those who believe that the nephew set up some kind of romantic tent date in the OP's home, which can be debunked by the fact that they have their own home, and by the neighbor's claim that the tent was up when they left to get lunch, and gone by the time they came back. If it was some kind of tent date, then it likely would have been around 1 to 2 hours long. Not much of a date if you ask me. And furthermore, no tent setup or tent at all was captured on the camera footage. And for those of you who have never set up a tent, there is a degree of effort involved, which to me at least, makes it hard to believe that the cameras did not capture the motion, or even just a couple frames of it in the video footage. As for the friend neighbor who also owned a tent, the tent reporting neighbor has gone as far as to say that their tent was not the one that they saw inside of the OP's home. And that pretty much wraps this story up. But I am curious to hear who you think it was down in the comments. This post was uploaded onto the RBI by a now deleted user on the 4th of July 2025. I believe my brother has been replaced. I am 30. Want to preface this by saying I'm not mentally ill, and this is not the schizo post you are expecting. I have no better way to articulate what I'm thinking right now. My brother, M20, just came back from his gap year, traveling Asia in hopes that he'd find himself. We were never really close, so his lack of contact during this year didn't strike me with too much alarm. But my parents have informed me of 3 separate incidents in which they needed to contact consulate authorities to ask about him. He's a mummy's boy, so this did seem very out of character. We hosted a dinner for my brother's return to the country, but upon seeing him at the airport, it was like a stranger tried to draw my brother from memory and pass that as the real thing. He looked completely different. He was severely underweight. He looked 2 to 3 inches shorter. He seemed bedraggled and unkempt. Believe me, this was the opposite of my brother prior to this trip. He has always been a germaphobe, someone who washes his hands twice to make sure he eliminates all the bacteria. But this guy? He smelled horrendous, didn't even talk to us, or properly acknowledge our existence. He begrudgingly gave our mom a hug, and our dad a handshake. He did not say hello to me. It's been around 2 weeks, and what I've been hearing from my parents is horrifying. Apparently, he's extremely active at night and sleeping during the day. They can only get faint murmurs out of him, and his speech is becoming increasingly nonsensical. He doesn't shower, he doesn't seem to eat. He spends all his time locked away in his room, doing something, my parents don't know what, extremely loudly. They've already contacted a doctor, and he's on a waiting list to see a therapist. I suggested getting the police involved, but they were determined not to. And I don't know what to do. I've volunteered to stay over and be the peacekeeper, as our parents are getting old, and I'm personally worried about that psycho doing something to them. However, my parents have rejected this. I was never close with my brother, but this isn't him at all. Does anyone know what could have caused this, or what we can do? It's like someone kidnapped my brother and replaced him with that dude from Castaway. This sounds like it's from a movie, but most people in the comments seemed to believe that something could have happened to the OP's brother while he was away, and he was now experiencing mental health issues. Sounds like he had a bad time and might have entered psychosis. A doctor is the first step to helping him. Your brother is definitely in the age range where severe mental illness can show up. I would say get him in to see a doctor ASAP. Don't wait for a therapist appointment. This sounds awful, and I wish you luck. Maybe drug-induced psychosis? It normally goes away after several weeks at its worst. Or even worse, schizophrenia that's been exacerbated by drug use. Schizophrenia doesn't just go away. Schizophrenia typically begins to develop in men in their late teens and early 20s, which would be around the age range of the OP's brother, as they were taking a gap year, which I assume would be from college. There is also the possibility of the brother experiencing a form of PTSD from something traumatic happening to them abroad. And of course, the potential for this to be drug-induced. Seeing as how the OP mentioned that their brother was going to Asia to find themselves, we can assume that they were in a very mentally and emotionally vulnerable state during their trip. And after some time, the OP did come back to this post with an edit. Edit. I've seen a lot of people suggest theories including drug use or underlying mental health issues. I had my mother over today, primarily to talk about my brother's condition. My wife was against mentioning the DNA test I ordered, so they are still unaware of my suspicions. My mom told me about 3 incidents involving the authorities in Vietnam. The first one was a wellness check, after my parents heard nothing from him for about a week. This might have been overzealous on my mom's part. The second and third instances were actually a part of the same correspondence, but turned out to be much more disturbing than I thought. Local authorities were worried my brother and 2 other female friends had been trafficked in Laos, as they failed to return to Vietnam on time. However, this was resolved after half a month. I have no idea the status of his friends, but I suspect they all returned to Vietnam together. With regards to my brother at present, my parents have since agreed to my suggestions of adding cameras to communal areas, as well as installing a doorstop in their own room. They have also given me the news that they will go private to seek psychiatric treatment for him starting next week. We'll keep you all updated. The trafficking in Laos is likely related to the Asian Golden Triangle network, in which regions within the triangle traffic people and even trick people with the promises of fake jobs only to be held against their will and forced to work for free in the drug trade. But since this issue was seemingly resolved, I do not believe that this is what happened. Putting cameras in the common areas is a good idea, as it would help keep an eye on the brother and maybe even get a better sense of his mental state when nobody is around. If the brother did get professional help, then maybe things could have gotten on track. But only about a week later, the OP would come back with a shocking update on a separate post. Hey y'all, I thought I'd share an update. This will also be my last post on this site, and I wanted to say a quick thank you to everyone who commented. To those who provided genuine help and support, I couldn't be more thankful. My brother is dead. We found him in the early hours of this morning, and I've spent the rest of the day finding the courage to make this post. Maybe it's shock, but I'd like to think he died over in Vietnam, and upon his return, his body was simply catching up, rather than prolonging his torment. You all do a wonderful service here, so please keep doing what you are doing. All the best. The OP does not explain how exactly their brother passed away, but regardless of how, the news was tragic to read. Many of the commenters on this post shared their condolences, and the OP seemed to appreciate the support that they were receiving. I can only imagine the pain that the OP, their brother, and the family were all going through leading up to this. The brother facing his own internal battles, and the family forced to watch as one of the people they love drastically changed before disappearing completely. Out of respect for the OP, I will not dwell on how their brother passed away, but I will also offer my condolences to them. And as we wrap up this story, I remind each and every one of you to check on your friends and loved ones, and remember that everyone is fighting their own battles, and the best thing we can do is be there for one another, because you never know when you'll see them for the last time. That wraps up this episode, but before I go, I want to announce that I will now be posting my story narrations on a separate channel at Cold Coffin Reads. I originally started this channel as a narration channel, but as we grew, my deep dive and more investigatory style content quickly took over in popularity. My narration videos started getting negatively impacted, and so I have been uploading them less and less. But after a lot of thought, I have decided to migrate that content over into its own space, so that narration enjoyers can continue to listen. All of my previous stories will remain on this channel, but if you enjoy the narration videos, then I encourage you to subscribe. I plan to upload 1 week on here and 1 week on there, but of course that's subject to change with my current situation. And that's pretty much it. Leave a like if you made it this far, consider subscribing, and as always, thanks for watching.